A window through the ages, the poem behind the pages we scroll. Sickness and speed, how the superhighway takes its toll. We drove past what was lost and found neon skies of newness. We breathed like men half drowned, drank polluted streams like men dying of thirst, raced to the library to see who could first unscroll the future. The present may be only its own lonely meta-commentary, but tomorrow can be pure, picturesque, and more about the painting than its score.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Might I just say, I look forward to hearing your poems every week.
Thank you. Might I just say, I dread reciting them every week.
Understandable.
Here, next week you can write one. How about that?
Oh my.
See, it's pressure, right? It's pressure.
But you have the poet energy, whereas I don't.
I have the nervous energy because I feel like there's a lot of pressure on it because it might be someone's first episode listening. So if it is, welcome to Solacene.
Yeah, this week we're answering some questions about degrowth that we posed on last week's episode. And as Aaron's poem alluded to, we're going to be covering topics such as degrowth and art, degrowth and technology, and living off the grid, which you and I this week have been almost exclusively talking about due to a number of factors.
We have. We'll get into that. So we're going to start with art. Mm-hmm. The thing is, like, when I try and write a poem for this podcast, I always think, okay, we're just trying to paint a picture of the future.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I get this really evil urge to like, oh, but maybe I want to criticize the present. So that's kind of what the poem was about. It's like, let's be positive. That's what it's about. So yeah, degrowth and art. That was the question we posed. Not really a question. It's just a topic. This week we kind of made a little promise that we're going to try and form legitimate, actionable questions. Because otherwise we're just directionless.
Yes.
So which direction did you take this question?
I essentially tried to define what degrowth art would look like because right now there isn't much. As we know, as we were preparing to publish our zine, we were looking for degrowth artists, and there was basically one that we came across. Yeah,
I mean, that we found so many that were comics, newspaper comics or cartoonists that were all about criticizing today, but it's like, that's not really it. We're looking for the other side of the coin.
Yeah, and then I also took it in a direction of what does art look like in the future in terms of how we integrate it into our daily lives. So I think I'm going to start with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's good.
So we were recently watching, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, this BBC or this YouTube video about the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
And what really stuck out to me from that was there is this reenactment of a cattle herder's cabin up on a hill in the Scottish Isles where for months at a time they would go up there with their cattle and then come down during the winter months.
Right.
And these people were lower class, they were farmers, they just kind of lived off the land. But even then, they really valued making things beautiful. So it said in this documentary, they scraped together enough money to have their wardrobe and their headboard all decorated with this really beautiful imagery. And the wardrobe that was in his little cabin in the woods, basically, is more beautiful than anything I've ever owned. Because it's just, there was such a value to making daily look things nice. And it also, in that documentary, was talking about engraving baby cradles, how they would, even their tools that they would use in the farm would have these really beautiful paintings or engravings on them. And we don't really do that anymore. It's like a knife is a knife. We don't care if there's a beautiful detail on it or whatever.
That's true. And what I thought you were going to say was that there was a family home which was quite a poor family, but they made a point of emphasizing how even the poorest families would have some kind of musical instrument.
Yes, that as well. But there is just such a value on art that I feel like we have lost in almost all areas of our lives, because right now it's like if you're going to get a handmade utensil, it's going to cost 10 times the amount. And even then, it might not be made to last. So why would you bother spending the money on that or the time to make it yourself? But in a degrown future, I imagine things are just a lot more beautiful because we're going to value them. Right now, we don't value the plates that we're eating on, but in the future, I imagine we will.
Decorative plates, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
I also love how historically, I feel like we raised artists. Like today, I feel like no one's raised an artist the way that they perhaps used to be.
What do you mean by that?
Okay. basically I feel like kids, they'd be trained in language, they'd be trained in maths and science, but they'd also be trained in art for the most part. Like all of the abstract artists, they had a background in classical art. And they were all a bit more privileged, but I think we're in school for 13 years. There could be more of an emphasis on 50-50 art and more practical things.
I definitely think that. I don't know that it was the case that it was more democratic in the past. I think it was always just rich kids
Yes.
and private schools that taught art. But I definitely do think that's something that should filter to general education.
Yes.
No doubt. When I was thinking about degrowth art, I had a similar kind of path that I charted, which is that there isn't exactly degrowth art because, I was kind of contrasting it to other movements or ideologies, such as a couple we're going to talk about later, cottagecore being one, dark academia, even solar punk is one that's maybe the most analogous to degrowth. All these other kind of internet subcultures or niches that have maybe political or lifestyle undertones have provoked art in the name, in their name. So solar punk has produced a whole genre of graphic designers and even some writers and things like that, and some movies. With degrowth, it's like, it's almost the opposite. It's almost as if the movement or the ideology is at least heavily inspired by, if not directly coming from, aesthetics, I think, which is rather interesting. It's kind of like the other way around. So yeah, there isn't really a current genre of art that like espouses the virtues of degrowth. It's more like all through history there have been representations of the ideal, an Arcadia, some kind of pastoral utopia, which I think degrowth, the contemporary movement, draws heavily from. And I don't want to spoil the zine, but we have like a whole reading list in there. I guess for something that we've mentioned on the podcast before, Studio Ghibli films, I think especially, say, My Neighbor Totoro, that's like super degrowth. Yeah,
for sure. I envision degrowth art as a mix between pastoral and like the futurist movement. And I just Googled degrowth art, and this guy called Don Dixon came up. Have you come across his art?
No.
And this is almost exactly what I was trying to encapsulate in a page of words, but that's kind of hard to do. So I found his art, which is almost perfect. It's this pastel-y, looks like a kid's book, but it's slightly distorted in the perspective, and there's technology, and there's just people on the land. So I'll show you this picture.
Oh, wow. That's wild and kind of confusing. But yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the end of Interstellar, when they're on like the curved planet, but everything's all very green.
Yeah, and I'll show you one more of his pieces. Just really bright colors that I feel like the pastoral paintings often have a bit more muted colors, but I imagine in the future a bit more bright, and obviously technology integrated into these really naturey places.
Yeah, that's very nice. The really kind of bucolic pastoral paintings of old, I don't forget the colors have faded since they were painted.
That's true.
But yeah, I agree. A couple other things I wanted to say about art that weren't just paintings or visual art were that it would generally be like some kind of themes in art in the degrowth world. And I like that you mentioned the different ways with which we would interact with it. Another one that came to mind is that there'll be much less celebrity culture for the biggest artists, like, I don't know, Wes Anderson. It's like we'd just know his films and study them, but there wouldn't be like any celebrity gossip per se. Yeah, a couple other mediums that I think would be important in terms of manifesting degrowth, I suppose, architecture.
Yes.
So sustainable architecture using really old, forgotten, as well as new technologies to save energy and materials. I think that's very inspiring, as well as upcycled fashion. This is something that we're already seeing like really trendy. Hopefully it doesn't go out of trend. I feel like it might, but hopefully that doesn't happen. It's very popular on TikTok. And it's also frugal, and it's more inexpensive, which is a plus when it comes to trying to make these things popular.
Yeah, I am getting into making my own clothes, as I've mentioned. But as I get into that, I am learning just how expensive it is, and that is why people do not make their clothes anymore. Because I figured, oh, how much is a ball of yarn? Apparently it's $16 for a nice ball of yarn, and you need like 8 or 10 to make a sweater. So it's way more expensive than buying one new or used.
And also the sweater might turn out
Tiny.
Tiny.
You might end up with a tiny sweater if you cannot get your gauge right. I felt so silly last night. I went out with a couple of girls who are knitters, and I'm just getting into crocheting. And I was like, yeah, the gauge was off. And like, I felt the vibe shift as if they were like, ooh, your gauge is off. And I was like, no, it's no big deal. But then I learned this morning, yeah, it was a big deal. So I appreciated their kind of words of warning. And I'll give them to you if you're getting into making your own clothes. I feel like in a degrown future, there will also be more artists. Like, everyone will have a little bit of artist in them. Right now, we all would never call ourselves artists.
Yeah.
Even though I feel like we're kind of born them. I know that's like a cliche thing to say. Like, there's an art in how you decorate your home, how you prepare your food and serve it. But we're all a bit more utilitarian. And I feel like we've all been kind of forced into this just do what you have to sort of mentality to survive. But it's like giving an extra 20 minutes a day to value how you arrange your rooms, your plates, your outfits.
Yeah.
Just kind of feel the artist within you. And I feel like everyone will do that a bit more in the future.
I think it very broadly depends on your definition for art.
Yes.
I don't think that it's ever the case that like the majority of the population is going to consider themselves hyper creative. But I do think it's the case that the majority of the population would benefit from some kind of creative outlet on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And that could be whatever. I mean, I've always thought that conversation can be art. It's like you're speaking it. That's my pretentious way of viewing this podcast.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it just used to be the standard for people to sketch and paint on the walls of their homes.
That's true, yes.
Write letters, which we don't do anymore. So
I didn't really want to comment on like, oh, sketching on paper is so much better than sketching on a tablet, because I feel like it's far be it from us to judge or criticize how people want to be creative. I mean, we've both made like digital art before.
Yeah.
And it scratches, I think, a lot of the same itch. I do think that the haptic feedback you get from using a piece of paper or an easel or a real instrument is pretty great. And I do think degrowth encourages those things. But I think all art is valid. I'll use a buzzword. It's valid.
100%. I used to be like a bit anti-graphic design before I tried it, I suppose, before I understood the software a little bit. And then I was like, oh, this is almost the exact same brain function that you
puts
like
you in the
use.
in the same space.
Yeah, which is really neat that's like an option and pretty accessible. Like, all you need is a screen and a mouse sort of thing. And it's fun, because then it's like if you mess up, you don't have to throw a bunch of paper. So you said you didn't want to gripe about using digital art or digital alternatives to making music or interacting with worlds, but would you like to gripe about using those things in a different way, perhaps?
What are you alluding to, Alicia?
I'm alluding to the metaverse, Aaron.
Right.
This morning, you subjected me to watching almost an hour and a half. You literally left at one point of Mark Zuckerberg talking about the metaverse.
Yeah.
And I had almost a similar reaction to the reaction I had watching Dear Evan Hansen. It was like a similar, like, guttural, this is not right.
Are we going to go here? This is like our first on-air roast session, and it's like a double whammy. It's Mark Zuckerberg as well as Dear Evan Hansen. We might have some theater kids in the audience who are like, hey, I love that movie.
It's a you problem, I
guess.
suppose.
I mean, we don't often comment on news as it happens, but this just felt like a special, very, very topical exception.
Yes, well, we were going to talk about living off the grid.
Yeah, okay.
Before even learning about the metaverse, we were both thinking this week, it would be really nice. Just because you can kind of avoid all of the turmoil and the constant, like, roller coaster of emotions that come along with living in an urban area. Because, like, we both intentionally try to avoid news because it's just too tumultuous. And I feel like you can't actually make progress if every day you're just being kind of, like, slapped in the face. But when you live in an urban area, especially during COVID, you literally need to check the news, or else you don't know if you're going to go to the grocery store and doors be closed, as has happened to us. So going off the grid is quite appealing right now. Same with just the food we're eating and like, in the winter, I just always crave a wood fire versus, like, turning on a knob on the wall sort of thing. So we were craving it before learning about the metaverse. But then once we learned about that, we said, get us out of here. Okay.
Well, okay, let's rewind a little bit.
Okay.
Because that video came out like 2 months ago.
Yes.
The Facebook thing, Meta. So for those who don't know, It was Mark Zuckerberg, talking about the future of the internet, something about Web 3.0, which means that everyone's wearing VR helmets and interacting virtually, exercising virtually, playing a bunch of video games in VR.
Working virtually.
Yeah, doing meetings.
Yes, having a virtual home where you store all your virtual goods.
Yeah.
Kept saying that.
I mean, the thing is, like, it's just so on the nose that I don't even know where to start to criticize it, or if I even want to. It's just kind of, it's like you just say the things and that is enough to criticize it, I think.
It's true.
One thing I do find very positive is on the comments of the YouTube videos about the metaverse, it was across the board negative. Everyone sharing a similar repulsion. There's really no other word, or disgust to us, which I love. But yeah, it does contrast nicely with what we were going to talk about, which is this romance that we think a lot of young people have with regards to living off the grid, or just going back in time somehow to be pre-internet, pre-industrialization. I don't know. And it's hard to find statistics on this, so it might just be anecdotal. But I do think you can look at the popularity of things like cottagecore online, dark academia. Animal Crossing was a giant thing during the pandemic, which is a game all about literally starting from new on a desert island and building up everything around you. And yeah, we wanted to just speak personally as well, because that's a feeling that we've both had for the future. I like the idea of living on a boat. I can't sail and I'm scared of the ocean, but I just think there's such a spirit of adventure and freedom about it, which obviously characterizes living in a forest, just starting anew somewhere, which is exciting for people. But I came up with 3 underlying reasons which I think people might kind of pine for this type of lifestyle. And the primary one, and the one I think that's most important, is meaning, the meaning that comes with it, or / difficulty. Because I have this idea that people, when it comes to technological innovations or just new ways of living, people right now don't actually want, it's not exactly accurate to say people want an easier life. I think it might be more true to say people want a harder one. And this is not trying to be kind of ignorant to the struggles of people working minimum wage, paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay rent and stuff. I don't mean difficulties like that, because those aren't enjoyable, those aren't fun. No. I mean difficulties for which the individual is actually responsible.
Yeah, I call that a good kind of stress, because everyone living in the normal world basically is stressed more than ever in history. So it's like, why would living off the grid, where you literally have to be afraid of an avalanche, be afraid of like a weather storm way more than you would if you were living in a city?
Yeah.
Why would that be any better? But it's like, I feel like it's a good kind of stress.
Well, it's because it depends on you. It's 100% dependent on you. Whereas today, supply chains get cut, or a global pandemic, or your landlord raises the rent. You're just toast. Like individual responsibilities like that rely on our own competence are just fundamentally different from COVID, politics, wages, etc., economics. Yeah. Like if there was just a big recession caused not at all by me or you, or most people listening to this, we just suffer for something that was not our fault. And this kind of goes into my second underlying reason that I think people romance for living off the grid, which is a kind of growing misanthropy, which comes from overexposure to people. Like, I know hopefully people relate to this when you watch the news, and whatever your politics, whatever your views, you just get disgusted. Like you just think, I'm done with people. Yeah. I mean, with COVID, this is especially obvious. But yeah, you just, you know.
Yeah, and I think if you lived off the grid, your faith in humanity would be restored, because, okay, you could go live literally in the middle of the woods, but for the most part, most people that I've seen who go off the grid, they befriend their neighbors, even if their neighbors live several kilometers away. You literally have to work together. It's like, oh, one person's going into town, they'll get everything that everyone needs. Oh, there's one car in this community, we all kind of share it. And I feel like even if your neighbor had completely different politics than you, they were like an old person who you just kind of like really didn't get along with due to different experiences, I feel like you would still find the humanity in each other, a way that we can't seem to manage to do on the internet.
Yeah, well, I think with the mass media and the mass news, it promotes division. Like everyone always says that. People actually get more racist from watching the news, for instance. Like that was a study that proved that. But it's like, the news just highlights all the worst parts of humanity. Yeah. So it's not fun to watch, and you don't come out of it a better person, I think.
Mm-hmm. And we always talk about how like the internet makes us way more independent. It feels like it's me against the world. And I feel like people who are looking at living off the grid, they might say, well, isn't that going to make you way more independent and way more like isolated from your fellow man? But I feel like that isn't the case. It's like a good kind of dependence, a good kind of stress.
I mean, I've never lived off the grid, so I don't know. I'm just talking about why people might desire it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Third reason that I think is just the aesthetics, like the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no graffiti, which is great.
Yeah.
There would be no, I don't know, cigarettes. Sorry for people who smoke, who listen. And it's closeness to nature. We haven't actually talked a lot about nature on this podcast, even though we're talking a lot about degrowth. And there's nothing more beautiful than nature, however nice the town is that you're in. That's my opinion anyway.
Mm-hmm. Some of the things I was thinking of why people might want to live off the grid, they kind of like are aligned with yours, but I'll just mention them. One of them is that you always have something to do, but like, again, in a good way.
Yes.
Right now we wake up and it's like we have something to do from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, but none of it is fulfilling for the most part.
None of it's directly for you.
Yes.
You're making money for someone else so that you can make a sliver of it.
Yeah, and I feel like we all crave having something to do.
Yes, we do.
And so that's kind of the fun part of living off the grid. I was watching Isabel Page, who has a YouTube channel, and she doesn't live off the grid, but she lives like in the middle of the woods on the electrical grid, but everything else she's self-sufficient in. And she was like, I was sick for 2 weeks, and it was really nice because literally all I had to do was cut the wood, like focus on surviving, and for some reason that felt nice is basically what she said. She's like, it was the only time in my life I've ever just survived, and that's a really unique experience, and I think it would make us enlightened almost.
The other thing about it is, I mean, people would still want, I don't know, video game consoles and internet access, but if you didn't have those things, what I was referring to in like the old Scottish cabin that had an instrument, it's like there would just be quiet every night, should I say, would be quiet and just in the cabin. You know, it wouldn't be on a screen or with a VR headset of somewhere else. And it's like, that makes you more bored and potentially more miserable. But I have this little theory that boredom and misery are good for humans.
Yeah, that's where creativity and problem solving come from.
That's true.
Because if we were never bored, we would never have any ideas, basically, because your brain would have no time to come up with the ideas. And if you can always just Google the answer, you're going to have zero problem-solving skills. And another cool thing about living off the grid, I feel like, with problem-solving is, like, you're not going to have everything at your disposal the way we kind of do in a city. It's like, if I need a cheese grater, I can just go buy a cheese grater.
Right.
But if you're off the grid, you're going to have to try and figure out how to grate some cheese using a knife or a cheese shredder, or a vegetable shredder, as we do.
Vegetable peeler.
Peeler, yeah. I'd be interested to know how many of our listeners like have a desire to do this or have at least considered it, because I feel like the numbers would be high.
Well, especially now.
Yeah.
It's like every time I check the news or I just read about government or the pandemic, it just really makes me want to. But the thing is, we're not self-sufficient, is the thing.
Like, so we have to learn how to do everything. Yeah,
that's why it's strictly, for now, for the most part, just a romantic thing. Like with the cottagecore people, it's like, oh, I just want to live in a cabin and make my own dresses and stuff. But it's like, but you can't sew. No offense to those people, but that's, you know, the skills are lacking. And of course, it's not our fault, but it can be remedied by us. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I feel like when people are introduced to the concept of degrowth, what they imagine is everyone living off the grid sort of thing. But I feel like we should probably make a note that that just isn't what it will be like in a degrown future.
This is a completely separate conversation, basically.
Yeah, I think some people live off the grid in a degrown future.
Just like they do today.
Yeah, but it's really useful to be on a grid and to be in a community and...
Yeah, of course.
Especially if that's all sustainable and a bit more personable. Speaking
of personable, the organism of the week this week, I was inspired by our question about degrowth and art. So I was like, I'm just going to choose a fictional species.
Okay.
And since we've recently been rewatching the Hobbit movies, not sure why, the eagles.
Eagles.
That's the organism of the week. So I'm going to show you an image. You have to describe it.
Wait, are we talking about eagles or the eagles?
The eagles.
The eagles
or
are coming.
The great eagles. The great eagles are coming.
Okay. So the great eagles, huge.
Yeah.
Bigger than a man.
Oh, yeah.
Bigger than a wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Huge wingspan. All brown.
Do you want to know the wingspan?
What's the wingspan?
Well, I could only find Tolkien's words on the wingspan for the biggest eagle, who was appropriately named the Lord of Eagles. Mm. And it was 180 foot.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's like a building.
Sure.
I don't actually know. And the eagles are so majestic. When they come screeching in, you just feel awe.
Yes.
Even if the CGI is horrible.
Well, that's why I showed you an illustration.
Yes, I prefer the illustration much more to the CGI eagles.
Shout out to Ted Naismith, who is a famous Lord of the Rings illustrator, because I was looking through his drawings. They're very romantic, very lovely. So the eagles, if you want to hear a little bit of their lore, they were associated with the Valar, who are kind of like Middle-earth's angels. Okay. The eagles are sentient, they can talk, and they typically like to help men, elves, and wizards in their quest to defeat evil.
Nice, good for them.
I love the eagles. I know there's a lot of people who are Lord of the Rings fans, and I guess we're like kind of Lord of the Rings fans.
Yes.
Who don't like them because they're just a plot device.
They're a bit of an ex machina.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. In the movies and a little bit in the books as well. But I don't know, I think they're very inspiring. They're art that inspires an appreciation for nature, which is the kind of art that I like. Mm-hmm. And they're eagles. Even small eagles are cool. So big ones are just double cool.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen an eagle?
I don't think so.
They're really cool. There's a part of Nova Scotia which had a lot of eagles. And when you see them screeching through the sky, you'd be like, whoa, scared.
You're really fixed on the screeching, aren't you?
Well, it's because there's this person on YouTube that you listen to sometimes. And what is it called?
Oh, you mean, okay, there's a musician on YouTube who makes like hip-hop remixes.
Yes.
And his kind of DJ tag is just an eagle screecher. He plays before the beat drops or something.
His DJ tag.
Yeah.
And I just like that. Because I feel like they're usually just like a name or something. But he just has the
They're very
screech.
musical, yeah.
Yeah. And I always think about it.
And I try and mimic that ad-lib in my life sometimes.
You do.
We'll just be out and about. Not so much since we moved into a city.
Yeah, that would be concerning.
And I just hit the screech.
You definitely used to do that way more, and I didn't like it because it was scary. Since we're at a little bit of a break here, Aaron decided not to do his homework for a second week in a row.
Right, okay.
Just going to call him out because...
Well, here's the thing, okay?
Yeah.
So the homework, if people remember from last week, and indeed the week before, was to relate degrowth to one of the UN's 16 Sustainable Development Goals. And I did it halfway and I picked a goal, but then I just felt weird trying to talk about developing places and degrowth, which is kind of fundamentally about places that are already developed. And I was like, I don't want to be telling people how to develop. So I chose not to out of ethical reasons. Would you accept that as a professor? No, you wouldn't.
I might. Because I feel like there is a bit of a thing. Like the Sustainable Development Goals are just kind of universally like, what even...
Yeah, there's just no point to them.
Yeah, they're just kind of silly. Like the original set, what were they called? The UN Millennial Development Goals. They were literally pretty much all met by accident. So it's like, glad they're met, but it's like it just kind of was a bunch of accidents that made them happen. So these ones, I think they're kind of fun when you are trying to invent a project or when you're trying to come up with ideas. They're kind of inspiring because they're all different goals, and I feel like they can be applied to developed countries is the thing. So that's kind of what I took them as. I was thinking of like North American countries, and I chose SDG 1, which is no poverty. And the essence of it was climate action is like completely linked to social justice and social sustainability. I'm not going to go into it because it's not a full segment, but I feel like that's kind of how it is with all the Sustainable Development Goals. It's just like in degrowth, we're looking at the big picture. We're not just looking at ocean plastic cleanup. We're not just looking at minimum wage increases and universal basic income. It's like we're looking at how it's all connected and therefore encouraging sustainable development.
Can we come up with some kind of question from that jumble? Maybe if we tried to form our own set of degrowth goals?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. We're not going to set it at 17, though. There might not be that many.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, Solacene development goals, we'll say.
SDGs. Solacene degrowth goals.
Yeah.
We just try and get a hashtag.
Yeah.
Just always, we see people talking about the SDGs. We're like, oh, it's catching on.
Yeah. Like, oh, the UN's talking about it. Good for them.
Okay, so moving on to our last question of the day, which was to provide real-life examples of degrowth technology, which we alluded to last week. Not going to lie, I struggled with this one as well, and feel like I'm not pulling my weight as co-host. Well, I was struggling with just this term of degrowth technology, because it's like inherently degrowth is something of a pushback against most technological advances. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking technology that enhances our own capabilities and not just that which makes things more convenient at the expense of other things. Like that is broadly how I define degrowth technology. So one is like a bicycle. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is a piece of technology which is pretty much just good. Mm-hmm. Makes us stronger, helps us get around. I think they're nice looking. Yeah. Can be made sustainably. Musical instruments is another one. But I struggled with finding, or maybe I just wasn't imaginative enough, things that are being developed today. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can help us out there.
Yeah, I chose all systems because I think there's a lot of degrowth information technology that I talked about last week, like the apps that tell you where there's public washrooms, where to get food that has been marked down, and so on. And I think that's the main area of growth, but also technology that builds competence. So I learned that there is this social media for yarn artists where you share skills, you answer each other's questions, you share links to good places to get yarn in your community, and so on. And it's like, this feels like a degrowth technology because it's building community, but it's like these people are very clearly plugged into the real world. They're knitting and crocheting and making wall hangings. So I think it's kind of a fun example. But the ones that I chose to mainly talk about were ones that build competence and build community. So I chose, there's this project that I did for university. The project was essentially to help this organization that was starting up within a community, and they were reopening this old storefront that had a ton of history in the community. Like, everyone who was over the age of like 60 remembers when it was in operation. They remember their grandparents telling stories about it. And we, instead of just saying, hey, we're going to turn this old space into a community center, or we're going to turn it into a market, what we did was we worked with the community. We went around and we collected a bunch of stories and ideas from what the people needed. And then what we ended up doing in the space, and they're still working on it because we only worked on it for like 6 months, was we did a market, because it was originally like a general store where people would go to buy food. But we didn't want to just do, okay, this is a strictly commercial space. There's also options to have a membership, like a co-op, where you could either volunteer to work there and get food in exchange, or you could swap your products, or honestly, if you came in and you were like, I need food, their intention is to just provide food for the community. But they also are using the space to have workshops on how to repair bikes and how to repair tools. They also have a tool library where you can go and rent out a chainsaw if you needed it, or a hammer, instead of having to buy one of your own. And then upstairs there was a community kitchen and a bunch of conference rooms where people could rent them out for birthday parties or for workshops or whatever they wanted to, a yoga class perhaps. And it just feels like these types of institutions are the future of the species, is these kind of multi-purpose spaces which were developed with the community, saying, what do you need? Here you go. Here's your thing. What do you think of that?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
It sounds good. Don't you think it'll be better if it was in the metaverse, though?
No.
I think that should be, just as an aside, not ignoring what you said, but that should be a question for next week. Just like an argument against the metaverse. Okay. Because you kind of sprung it on me this week, so I didn't really come prepared. I mean, we only watched it a few hours ago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need some time to let that seep in. Become a core memory.
Yeah.
Basically. And then the other technology that I chose were woofing. Do you know what woofing is?
No. Something about dogs.
No. So I think there's like some sketchy stuff with woofing. I've only like very briefly heard about it, but I'm going to just kind of in an idealized way talk about it. Basically, woofing is this website where farmers say, we need farm hands. People say, we want to travel. We want to have experience farming. We will work for you. And instead of paying the people, sometimes they pay them, but they will provide them home, food, adventures, kind of take them in, teach them their ways. And it's a very symbiotic relationship. Some people are learning, some people are gaining farm hands. And it feels like very degrowth because it's building in a lot of young people. Sometimes I think people take advantage of the system, but a lot of people just have a genuine interest in learning how to farm. Yeah. It's like, how are we going to do that? Because it's not practical to have to go live in a new area, buy all the food and everything. But in this way, it's like you're sustained. Like, you're not going to go hungry. You're not going to like not have a place to live. And you're going to learn all these skills, which I think is really cool.
It's very collaborative, and it's a kind of non-economic transaction, right?
Yeah.
Informal economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When it comes to degrowth technology, one that I did come up with was like decentralized energy stuff, especially green energy stuff. So like tiny wind turbines, solar panels on your house. I think it would be cool if we each had the ability to wire those.
I think so.
Even build those. And hydro, which there are a few companies that sell, and they're pretty popular in some places, small, rather domestic water turbines that you can use to just generate electricity for yourself. So one company I found was called Power Spout, which I like the name.
That is a good name.
Which is a company that makes exactly those. They're in New Zealand, and they also make them using like 70% recycled materials, which is cool.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like any degrowth technology is technology that kind of functions outside of the economic system.
Well, outside of the existing one, for sure.
Yes. Because it's like, money might be involved, but it's like, if we are functioning entirely within the economic system, like we are right now, our food's reliant on it, our power, our housing, and then it collapses, as you were saying, we are helpless. So perhaps if we all had a few of these different plugins, okay, maybe I'm plugged into the actual electricity grid, but I get all my food from a local farmer, and my employer is not just paying me money, they're also paying me in a local currency, they're also providing other resources to me, housing or whatever. If the economy collapses, you're not as desolate.
What about podcasts? Do you think that's a degrowth tech?
Kind of. We were talking about radio the other day.
Yes.
And I feel like podcasting, there could be just like a podcast radio network, perhaps.
Okay.
But also, like, getting them over your phone isn't the worst thing in the world because you're not looking at a screen, which I like.
That's true. I like the idea that, I mean, we might end up filming this podcast.
It's true.
Just a little Easter egg for the people who listen. In the coming weeks and months, you might see us. If you want. That'd be kind of weird.
You're going to have to start wearing pants.
But we swore we would never mention that on air, but I just get really, sometimes I sweat when we talk. So
you have a fleece jumper on and just these linen shorts.
Anyway. I like the idea of radio because everyone's listening to something at the same time. I think that's really beautiful. And I know it's hilarious because we moved from radio and from television to streaming because we don't want to have to listen to everything only at 6 p.m. But I don't know. I like the community feel of it. I like the idea of it being church bells or a rooster in the morning. Everyone's listening to it. I think that's neat. You know what else is called degrowth technology?
What?
The Solacene zine.
It is a cool degrowth technology because it's beautiful, sustainable, tactile. You can touch it, rip it, burn it as fuel.
If you want.
But that was what our thinking behind making a zine was. It was like something that people would have in their hands. And it's like, oh, we've been listening to this podcast for weeks and months. It's so abstract. But then you have the zine and you're like, this is so cool. And you can hand it around. You can leave it for someone to find on a bench.
I was mostly just trying to set you up to plug it.
Oh, buy the zine if you're interested. It's fun to read and to write in. And you can get it on our website.
Yeah, solacene.org.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.